Thank you for staying with us. And okay, Professor Imonoka Enehena says Nigeria is not that rich like we think. Budget of states of New York is almost like the budget of the continent. Angola, with 32 million people, annual budget is about $45 billion, which is far bigger than Nigeria's budget. Dubai, a state in UAE, 95% of our income is non-oil and gas sector. In other words, Nigeria really needs to rethink. And as Soji said, Alera, Soji says, let's not say Nigeria's good, we should think my growth. So if I'm thinking, Nigeria is thinking. But while we're talking
the
about...
same professor says it's time to do a rethink to grow our SMEs by bringing down the exchange rate, below double digit, produce basic infrastructure for them to thrive and get proper economic roadmap to deal with our indigenous and peculiar situations. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Prof. Let's switch gears and look at something else that's happening within the pandemic. When we're opening, we talked about an increased rate of domestic violence, and it's been a problem even before the pandemic, but some say it's been worsened by the restrictions, so people get to spend more time together until you see some other sides that were not very obvious. Now, according to a statement by the United Nations, we're taking a look at the increase in the domestic violence. The UN put out a statement that domestic violence has increased by reason of the lockdown. But how is that panning out here in Nigeria? To help us discuss this, we have Ms. Julie Oka-Donley, who's the Director General of NAPTIP. Thank you for joining us, Mrs. Donley.
Thank you for having me.
And how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Okay, well done. We do understand that your job requires that you ensure you look out for issues of trafficking and violence and all of that. But with that report, for instance, by the United Nations, what's your thinking?
Actually, during this COVID-19 lockdown, a lot of families have had to stay together for longer periods than previously. Like, for example, most people have to wake up in the morning, go to the offices and all of that, come back later in the evening. Some men are not used to being around their wives that long. It's true that some men are not really friends with their wives. Most of the time, they just live together. They just cohabit and live as tenants, in the same house. Unfortunately, they vent out this cabin fever, which they begin to suffer from, on their poor wives, rather than see it as a time to bond with their wives and their children. In some other cases, they become closer, they play games, they do things together. But sometimes, in some other cases, the faces of the wife just annoys the man for whatever reason, and it vents his anger on the woman, and even on some of the children as well.
The National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, some will say they're just concerned about issues of trafficking and all, but we do know that you pay attention to issues of violence, child abuse and all. When you say that sometimes the face of the other person just annoys the other, so there is that reaction, which wasn't there before now because they spend a lot of time outside of the home, but now they are forced to be together. What do you think should be done or can be done to manage this situation?
Counseling. We have professional counselors, and so when we arrest the offenders and rescue the victims, which most of the time happens to be the wife and the children, we counsel them. And the man just says, you know what, I'm just tired of seeing this woman's face, I mean, she's not my friend, and it's like they've had, problems with their relationship. They've just been managing it. But because they had to get out of the house to work, it was a little bit more manageable. But now that they are forced to sit in the house with their wives from morning till night, you know, they just couldn't stand it any longer. We succeeded actually in counseling some of them, but there are some really bad cases that we just couldn't do anything about. So we tried to find a way to keep the man away from the woman, you know, at least during the period of the lockdown. That was just the only way we could, you know, manage the situation.
Talk about this matter of domestic violence and how best to manage situations, but that will be when we'll come back from this break. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We have the Director General of the National Agency for the Prohibition of Tracking in Persons, Mrs. Julie Oka-Donley, in our studio in Abuja. Before we went on that break, you were talking about managing the situation. Aleo, you wanted to ask?
Yes. Julie, now we're talking about domestic violence, and we're talking as if it's only men who are violent towards their wives. I'm sure that there are cases of women who are also abusive towards their husbands. Is that correct?
Well, all the cases that we came across were just cases of the men who were violent against their wives. You know, we didn't have any case of the woman being the offender or the oppressor, as the case may be. They were all cases that concerned the wives. I mean, the husbands against their wives.
Okay. When you say no cases of women and being violent against their men, is it that they've not been reported? Because there are some cases of women beating up their men. And as funny as
well,
that
we
might
can
sound.
only work with cases that are reported to us. If for whatever reason the men are ashamed to report that their wives are beating them up, there's actually nothing we can do. We can only deal with cases that are actually reported. So there are cases where wives are abusive towards their husbands, but the husbands are not coming forward to report them for whatever reason. So we just have to deal with what we see.
Reporting, how much of these cases are reported to your agency? Because there is this thing that sometimes gets associated with this kind of matters, stigma. So do you get people coming forward to report issues of violence?
Yes, absolutely. In the last 2-3 weeks, we've had over 40 cases of violence, but all the cases were violence against women by their husbands, violence against children, rape, incest, where the husbands raped their children, cases of sodomy, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's. You also deal with issues of trafficking in persons. We haven't heard any sensational cases lately. Is it that your work in that area has reduced? Are we behaving better as a people?
Well, I would say right now, because of the COVID pandemic, things have been a little bit quiet. We've had more cases of violence against house helps, and we've had to rescue quite a number of house helps, you know, whose madams had poured some hot water on them, inflicted injuries on them by putting hot irons on their bodies and all of that. So those are the cases that we actually dealt with lately. I believe because of the pandemic, things are a little bit slow, as there's no, the restriction of movement. People are not able to travel from one place to another. So people are playing safe. But I foresee a situation where there will be a lot of online recruitment after the pandemic is over, because people would want to replenish their stock. I put it that way because human beings are now seen as a commodity. And of course, most of them would have died during this COVID-19 pandemic, especially abroad in the destination countries. So I foresee a lot of online recruitment going on, offering fake jobs that don't exist, scholarships and things like that. So Nigerians need to be very wary and very, very careful.
Yep.
Is there much trafficking within our borders going on?
Absolutely. There's a lot of trafficking going on within, mostly for domestic servitude and even sometimes for forced prostitution. You have people go within from one state to the other, bringing young girls and putting them in brothels and forcing them into prostitution. We've clamped down on a number of such and even sealed up the brothels and rescued a lot of girls. We have a lot of trafficking in, which is what's it called again? This baby factory is a kind of trafficking as well, where these girls are taken from various parts and put in a house, and the men come there to rape them, and they have babies, and they keep selling their babies. Right now, I think I have about 24 women in my shelter in Lagos who were rescued from baby factory. They've all had their babies now, and then they're in the stage of rehabilitation. So we had lots of cases like that.
Now, what do you think about this Yunusa case, which was concluded this last week? Okay, he didn't traffic the girl, but he kidnapped her, so to say, and married her and took her away to his place in the north. And he's been sentenced to 26 years in jail. You don't call that trafficking, do you?
There are so many elements involved in that case. There was an element of child trafficking, of course. There was an element of kidnapping. There was an element of rape as well, and forced marriage. There's so many elements, relating to that particular case. I personally was very upset about it. I wasn't in NAPTIP at the time, but I was really, really upset and prayed that she was going to get justice at the end of the day. And I'm very happy indeed, because this is the first case of its kind where somebody is convicted for a forced child marriage, amongst other crimes that he committed. And I hope that this is going to serve as a deterrent to others, and we're going to be having cases of like this where the offenders will be prosecuted and convicted and sent to jail. There was one case like this some time ago about a certain senator, but based on technicalities, being that the girl was an Egyptian, I think the case didn't go far. But this particular case so far has been the first, and I pray that it will be the last.
This matter of trafficking and violence, as the case may be, you talked about counseling. Is it enough to just say counseling will take care of this, or is it enough to just say Nigerians should be weary? What about education and information? How can we help to ensure that these things are minimized? Because some will say, I learnt it. I mean, this was what I grew up with. This is what I knew, for instance, in the case of violence.
Counseling is just one aspect. Awareness creation is key, which is prevention. And we've carried out a lot of massive awareness campaigns all over Nigeria. We have a lot of short, 1-minute video clips that we've put on all the social media platforms, just to make people know that these things are not right. And if they find themselves in such a situation, they know what to do, they know who to call, they know where to go. So we've put out that information everywhere. The counseling comes in when the victim is actually in our possession, and then we counsel them. And then we find out that most of the victims in this situation are victims who rely on their husbands for their means of livelihood. And so the men take advantage of that, thinking that they have nothing to do and nowhere to go. So after counseling them, we don't just say, okay, go back home, and we try to empower them, which is very important, because when a woman is empowered, it's very, very good for her. We also make those who don't go to school say, why don't you try and get some adult education? At least learn how to write your name, learn how to read, and all of that. But we still have educated ones as well, who work, in very high places, who are very well educated, and who are very comfortable. Some of them are actually even the breadwinners in their homes, but they find themselves, being beaten up by their husbands and taking their monies off them while they are feeding them and running their houses and paying school fees. So the situation is so complex. We have all sorts of situations, at the same time.
You spoke earlier about everything being a bit quiet now because of COVID-19. And you spoke about people who will be raring to go as soon as this is, what's the word now?
The lockdown's lifted.
As soon as things improve, getting raring to start their online recruitment and all that. Are the girls getting enough advice and, is there enough campaign to warn girls about such recruitments and they should be wary of job offers outside the country?
Yeah, we can do, I mean, we can do so much as we can do. Let me put it that way. But the truth is that the state governments have a role to play and they need to step up their game. And this is why we started setting up the anti-human trafficking task forces in some states. We have just in 5 states right now. But the state governments has to do a lot. They have to go to the communities, they have to go to all the local governments to carry out this campaign. NAPTIP, the federal government cannot do this alone. I keep saying it. The federal government cannot do this alone. The state governments, the local government, they have a role to play. They need to carry out massive sensitization campaigns because these girls all come from a state, so they need to carry out, they need to complement NAPTIP's efforts. On our part, we'll continue to do what we have to do because experience has taught us that most of these girls come from very rural, remote areas where they have little or no access to the internet, little or no access to the social media. So they are not aware. These traffickers move on. The moment they see there's a local government or there's a community that is a little bit enlightened, they move to the next and the next. And it's difficult for us to cover every area. So all hands must be on deck. National Orientation Agency, they have to be on deck. The local governments, the state governments, everyone has a role to play. The faith-based organizations, the CSOs, the NGOs, the media, of course, has a role to play. So we must all join our hands together and not just expect that NAPTIP alone can do the magic. Nigeria is very, very massive. So everyone must work together to ensure that we protect our girls and boys from being trafficked.
Now, Julie, Kingsley Ozugbo says to ask you why women or wives are not submissive. Would a man who is not an animal beat his wife if not for her attitude? Asks Kingsley Ozugbo.
I don't know about being submissive or what he means by being submissive, because there are some men, your upbringing is very important. I found out, during the course of my work, if a man is not well brought up, the woman is in trouble. I give an example of myself. When I was raising my kids, I used to tell my son, you'd never lift your hands to beat a lady. You touch your sister. She's a lady. And my son grew up with that. But when a woman, when a child grows up to think that a woman is a tool that can be beaten, or a woman is less than him, and so he has a right to slap her at the slightest provocation, and the mother sees nothing wrong with it, I mean, there's a problem. I don't understand when men talk about being submissive. Yes, a woman should be submissive to her husband, but the Bible also tells me that a man should love his wife and he should not beat up his wife. So it both goes it goes both ways. Respect begets respect. Some men are very abusive mentally. You abuse your wife mentally and you expect such a woman to be submissive. I mean, I don't understand it.
Where this matter of mental abuse, there are reports that might actually be more than the physical abuse that is reported. How is NAPTIP handling that kind of abuse?
Well, that's a very, very difficult type of abuse, and through counseling, there's really not much we can do but to counsel them and to ensure that these women, you see, when you don't have confidence in yourself, when you have a low self-esteem, it's very easy for a man to put you down. I counsel these women and I tell them, do not let anyone, man or woman, put you down in any way. You need to build up your self-esteem. You need to be confident of who you are. You need to know who you are. That is how to start it. So when these women come to us and tell us, you know what, my husband is so abusive. He abuses me mentally. He never sees any good thing in anything I do. He talks down on me in front of everybody. I said, then you need to step up your game. Make sure that it doesn't get to you. Get yourself busy. You understand? Just do different things. Just ignore him and do different. After a while, he will be tired. But if you show him that it's getting to you, then it continues. Because some men are just, you know, mentally abusive. They're just sadists. They enjoy seeing women unhappy. So if you're unfortunate to be with that kind of a man, then you have to re-strategize and make sure that it doesn't get to you. I know so many men like that, unfortunately, and I think it's part of a mental problem. They need counseling themselves. So such men also need to see a psychiatrist. They need counseling. I don't think such men are normal men, honestly.
But do we have enough capacity? When you use this word counseling a lot today, and then you mentioned another psychiatrist. I mean, in other climes, you have professional bodies set up almost on every street where people can walk in and get some kind of counseling. Do we have the capacity for this?
Yeah, I can tell you we have a lot of trained counselors. We have a lot of trained psychiatrists in Nigeria. But the truth is that most of the time we are in denial. I mean, if you tell a man now to go for counseling, the first question he will ask you is, do you think I'm mad? Do you think I don't know what I'm doing? You know, it's the mindset. You know, we need to start to learn that going for counseling does not mean you're a madman. So, of course, yes, we need to start carrying out awareness campaigns again, telling people that, you know what, if you're having a difficult time at home with your wife or even with yourself, you can get counseling. It doesn't mean you are mad. Maybe when we start, you know, maybe when we start educating people to change their mindsets, just like now there's so much education going on COVID-19, telling people that there's nothing to feel stigmatized about. If you have the virus, call the authorities and get treatment. Some people are still hiding and treating themselves at home, and then when it's late, they call the authorities and they die. You know, so this same kind of education, awareness, telling people that, look, going for counseling does not mean you're a madman or you're a mad woman. I think it will also help, and that is one thing we're also going to be doing now. We're going to be encouraging people to come for counseling because a lot of people are just getting mental problems, you know, just because of the mental abuse they are facing, especially in their homes from their husbands.
Mrs. Donnelly, just before we let you go, please respond to this tweet by Professor Enakena. He says, there's tension in homes where finance is strained because there's no clear roadmap on how to cushion the effects of the coronavirus. He says we should now plan for a census so we can have national economic policies to know youth/adult populations and the unemployed, and the employed. He believes that when we have proper structures, these issues of violence and trafficking will reduce immensely. That's what I think the tweet is saying. But what is your take as we wind down?
Well, I understand what he's saying, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about violence and trafficking. And I want to say that health is wealth. I mean, if the husbands are angry that there's no money and that's why they vent out their angers on the women, you have to be healthy to make the money. And of course, these policies that he's talking about, if they are in place, yes, it makes a lot of sense. I agree with him totally on that. But all I want to say before I wind down is you don't have to use your wife as a tool, beating tool just because you're frustrated or because you don't have money or whatever the reason may be. You have to show some love and respect to your wife and to your children and even to your house help. Because if you do not, NAPTIP will come after you. We don't care whether it's whatever the reason is for that action or for committing a crime. A crime is a crime, and we don't want to know why you committed a crime. If you commit a crime, we'll go after you, we'll pick you up, we'll arrest you and make sure you go to jail. So try to be good.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Julie Donnelly, who's the Director General of the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And we do hope that we'll help to curb.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, all right, so we'll be back in a moment. Do stay with us.